"I'd rather die than be yours," said the Apache woman when the cowboy cut her chains at dawn. The first light of dawn had barely touched the desert horizon. The sky was a soft, pale gray, and the wind carried the chill of the night across the empty land. In a small, isolated ranch, the sounds of the morning were quiet, just the faint rustle of dry grass and the distant crowing of a rooster. But in the corner of the ranch, hidden from the world, a woman sat on the hard wooden floor, her hands bound by chains. Her dark hair fell in messy waves across her shoulders, and her eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the room as if every shadow might hide a danger. She was an Apache woman, strong and proud, yet her freedom had been stolen, leaving her trapped in a life she did not choose. She had been brought here days ago, accused of a crime she did not commit. Her people, her family, her homeland, everything she loved had been taken from her in one cruel twist of fate. The ranch she now found herself in was not her home, and the people around her were strangers, speaking a language she did not fully trust. They treated her with suspicion, as if she were a problem that needed to be controlled, yet she refused to give them the satisfaction of fear. Her gaze, steady and unflinching, told them that though her body was chained, her spirit remained free. Outside the room, the cowboy worked quietly. He was not a man of many words, and he preferred the company of the land and the animals to people. He had grown up on this ranch, learning the rhythms of the land from sunrise to sunset. His hands were rough and calloused, the result of years of labor under the sun. But despite his quiet nature, he had a heart that noticed injustice even when others turned away. He had seen the Apache woman the first day she arrived. There was something in her eyes that spoke of courage, a strength that even the harshest chains could not break. The cowboy had been told by the landowner to watch her, to make sure she stayed where she was. Most people would have done this without question, but he could not help the unease that gnawed at him. How could someone so brave be treated like this? How could chains be placed on a person who had done nothing wrong? These thoughts lingered in his mind as he performed his daily tasks, feeding the horses, checking fences, and repairing the old barn. All the while his eyes kept drifting toward the small room where she was held, wondering if she had slept, if she was hungry, if she was scared. The Apache woman, for her part, paid little attention to the cowboy. She did not need a savior. She had survived worse than this, and she knew that freedom was something she had to claim for herself. But she was observant. She noticed the way he moved quietly around the ranch, the way he left her small bits of food without speaking, and the way he never raised a hand to her. It was a cautious kindness, and though she did not trust it yet, it was different from the cruelty she had known elsewhere. She kept her distance, but her mind worked constantly, planning, thinking, and waiting. Freedom was a careful game, and she would not let anyone play it for her. Morning deepened, and the light grew stronger. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Inside her room, the Apache woman stretched her stiff limbs and adjusted the chains on her wrists. They were heavy, cold, and uncomfortable, but they were also a reminder of what she had lost. She thought of her home, the mountains and the rivers she had loved. She thought of her family and the people who had been taken from her by forces she could not control. And she thought of herself, strong, resilient, and unwilling to be broken. The cowboy approached her door with a quiet determination. He carried a small set of tools in his hands, the metal glinting faintly in the morning light. He paused for a moment, listening to the soft sounds of her breathing, watching the way her body tensed and relaxed. He knew that what he was about to do was dangerous, not because the woman might resist, but because the landowner had warned him not to interfere. He had a choice: follow orders and leave her chained, or follow his conscience and risk everything. Taking a deep breath, he knelt by the door and began to work on the lock. Each click of the metal was a small heartbeat, echoing in the quiet room. Inside, the Apache woman felt the subtle shift in the air, the change in energy. She did not move, but her eyes flicked toward the door, sharp and wary. She sensed him, a man who did not belong in her world, yet who had chosen to be here in this quiet, secret way. Her mind raced. She had learned not to trust easily, not to rely on anyone. Freedom had always been hers alone. Finally, with a soft metallic sound, the chains clicked open. The cowboy pushed the door gently, peeking inside. He did not speak at first, letting the silence stretch between them. The Apache woman stood slowly, testing her movements, feeling the absence of the heavy chains on her wrists. It was a strange, almost surreal sensation, freedom after days of captivity. But she did not smile. She did not thank him. Instead, her eyes met his, steady and unyielding, and she spoke. "I'd rather die than be yours," she said, her voice calm but firm. The words were clear and sharp, cutting through the quiet morning air. The cowboy froze, surprised by the intensity of her statement. He had expected relief, gratitude, perhaps even trust. But this declaration of independence, was something he had not anticipated. It was not defiance for defiance's sake. It was a statement of her soul, a refusal to be owned, claimed, or controlled. For a moment neither of them moved. The wind whispered through the cracks in the wooden walls, and the ranch seemed to hold its breath. The cowboy looked at her, seeing not just the woman before him, but a lifetime of experiences, pain, and survival reflected in her eyes. He realized that cutting the chains was only a small step. Freedom was not something that could be given. It was something earned, something claimed through courage and resilience. The Apache woman began to move, stepping toward the door but not out of the room yet. She kept her distance, maintaining control over the small space that was temporarily hers. The cowboy remained kneeling, unsure of what to say, knowing that words might only complicate what had already been made clear. She did not need promises. She did not need explanations. She needed acknowledgement of her strength, not ownership of her life. As the sun continued to rise, painting the desert in gold and pink hues, the quiet tension between them held. The cowboy left the room slowly, giving her space, but his eyes stayed on her. He understood, perhaps for the first time, what it truly meant to respect someone's freedom. The Apache woman, now unchained, felt a strange mixture of relief and caution. She had survived the night, and now she faced the day with a new kind of clarity. She was still captive in many ways, surrounded by a world that did not understand her. But for the first time in days, she could move, breathe, and plan without the immediate weight of the chains on her wrists. Outside, the ranch began to come alive. Horses stirred in their stalls, the wind carried the faint scent of the desert, and the first workers emerged from the barns and houses. But inside the small room, time felt different. It was a moment suspended between past suffering and future possibilities. The Apache woman stood tall, her eyes scanning the room and the world beyond. She did not need the cowboy to follow her, to guide her, or to protect her. He had acted, yes, but his actions did not define her. Her life was her own, and that realization burned brighter than any fear or anger. As the morning grew stronger, the Apache woman allowed herself a small moment to breathe, to feel the sunlight on her face, and to think about what she would do next. She did not know where her path would lead, or what challenges awaited her beyond the walls of the ranch. But she knew one thing clearly: she would not be claimed, she would not be broken, and she would not allow anyone to decide her fate for her. The chains had been cut, but her freedom was only beginning. And in that quiet dawn, as the cowboy watched from the doorway, both of them understood that the world outside was larger, harsher, and more complicated than the small room that had contained them. But they also understood that courage, resilience, and respect could exist in the quietest of gestures. The cowboy had acted on conscience. The Apache woman had spoken her truth. Neither could take back the other's actions, but each had made a choice that could not be undone. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of sagebrush and earth. The desert stretched endlessly, open and unforgiving. And in that vast, quiet world, the Apache woman prepared herself to face whatever would come next, standing tall and unbroken, refusing to be anyone's possession. Freedom was not easy, but it was hers, and she would defend it, no matter what. The Apache woman moved slowly across the small room, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. Outside, the sun had risen higher now, spilling light across the dusty ranch. She felt the warmth on her skin and the strange freedom in her movements. It was almost too simple, yet it felt foreign. For years she had lived under rules not her own, surrounded by fear, pain, and chains, both physical and invisible. Now, standing in that quiet room, she realized the world outside her cell was larger than she had remembered, and she was determined to survive it on her own terms. Her mind drifted back to her childhood, to the land she had been forced to leave. She remembered the mountains rising against the sky, the rivers cutting through the valleys, and the soft green grass beneath her feet. She remembered the stories of her ancestors, of warriors and healers, of people who valued courage and freedom above all else. Those memories gave her strength, even in the darkest moments. Every injustice she had faced, every loss she had endured, had only hardened her resolve. She had learned early that life was not fair, but that did not mean she had to bow to it. She remembered the first time she had been taken from her family. She had been a young girl, no older than 10, when strangers came to her village. They spoke in harsh voices and gave orders she did not understand. Her parents had tried to protect her, but there was little they could do. She had been separated from them, moved from one place to another, and forced into obedience. That experience had left a mark on her heart, one that no chain could ever truly hold. She had survived because she had learned to trust her instincts, to rely on her mind and strength rather than anyone else's promises. The Apache woman shook her head slightly, clearing the memory. The past was heavy, but it was also a guide. She had survived before. She could survive now. Yet the chains at the ranch were not the only thing she had to worry about. The landowner who held her here was powerful and suspicious. He trusted no one, and any action against his orders could bring severe consequences. That was why the cowboy's gesture had been surprising. Cutting her chains in the quiet dawn had been brave, almost reckless, but it had also been an act of kindness she had not expected, and yet she could not simply accept it. Trust was earned, not given, and she had learned that the hard way. The cowboy moved outside the room, returning to his chores. She watched him from the corner of her eyes, noting the careful way he handled the horses and the way he kept glancing in her direction. He did not speak much, and when he did, his voice was calm and measured. There was no harshness, no attempt to control her, yet she remained cautious. She had been betrayed before, and she knew how easily a kind gesture could turn into another form of control. For now, she observed him quietly, learning his patterns, understanding his intentions without needing to speak. Her mind returned to her family, the people she had loved and lost. She thought of her mother's gentle hands and her father's stern but protective voice. She remembered her brothers and sisters, their laughter echoing through the village, and the lessons they had shared about survival, courage, and honor. Those memories were bittersweet, bringing both pain and comfort. She knew that the life she had been forced into had taken much from her, but it had also given her the ability to endure. Every hardship had made her stronger, sharper, and more determined to never be claimed by anyone again. As the day progressed, the Apache woman began to explore the small space she now called hers. She moved cautiously, testing the limits of her freedom. Each step was deliberate, each motion measured. The chains no longer bound her, but the fear of being recaptured lingered in the back of her mind. She had learned to be vigilant, to always consider her surroundings, and to never let her guard down completely. Survival was a game of awareness, patience, and courage, and she had become a master of it. The cowboy, meanwhile, went about his day with quiet determination. He fed the horses, checked fences, and repaired the barn, all while keeping an eye on her from a distance. He knew that giving her freedom was only the first step. True safety required constant vigilance, careful planning, and respect for her choices. He did not speak to her, did not attempt to force conversation, but his presence was a silent assurance that she was not alone. Yet he understood that she did not need him to protect her. She needed the chance to choose her own path, and he had no right to interfere beyond what was necessary to keep her safe. In the afternoon, the Apache woman allowed herself to sit near the small window, looking out at the desert beyond. The landscape stretched endlessly, open and harsh, yet beautiful in its own way. She thought of the mountains she had once called home and the rivers she had loved. She imagined walking through them again, feeling the grass beneath her feet and the wind on her face. The thought of returning to her homeland filled her with hope, but also with caution. The world outside the ranch was unpredictable and dangerous, and she could not take any step lightly. The cowboy approached the window, keeping his distance but offering a small bowl of water. She did not speak, but she nodded slightly in acknowledgement. Trust was slow to build, and she was not ready to speak freely yet. She observed him quietly, noting the care in his actions and the respect he showed without words. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight. For the first time in many days, she felt a flicker of connection, not dependency, but recognition that someone else could understand the importance of freedom and respect. As evening approached, the ranch began to quiet down. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. The Apache woman prepared herself for the night, gathering a small blanket and finding a comfortable spot near the window. She reflected on the day, the small victories, and the moments of understanding. She knew that the cowboy had acted out of conscience, not duty, and that his actions had given her a chance to reclaim some control over her life. Yet she remained wary. Freedom was precious, and she would guard it fiercely. That night, as the stars appeared in the clear desert sky, she thought of the future. She knew that challenges awaited her beyond the walls of the ranch, and that danger was never far. But she also knew that she had survived worse, and that her strength, courage, and determination would guide her. The cowboy had given her a small gift, but the real power lay within her. She was unchained, but she was also aware that true freedom required vigilance, strategy, and patience. She would not be claimed, and she would not allow anyone to dictate her path. In the quiet of the night, the cowboy returned to his own small space, reflecting on what had happened. He understood the depth of her statement that morning. She did not want to belong to anyone, and he had no right to offer her that choice. What he could do was respect her, protect her when necessary, and observe without interference. It was a delicate balance, one that required patience, empathy, and understanding. He had acted in a moment of conscience, but he knew that the real journey for both of them was only beginning. The Apache woman lay awake, thinking of her family, her homeland, and the mountains and rivers she loved. She thought of the people she had lost and the hardships she had endured. And she thought of the cowboy, a quiet presence in her life, someone who had acted without expectation or demand. She did not feel gratitude in the usual sense. She felt recognition, an acknowledgement that someone else understood, even slightly, the importance of freedom. By the next morning, the small routines of the ranch continued. The Apache woman moved carefully, exploring more of her room, observing the movements of the cowboy and the other workers. She did not speak much, but she listened, learned, and planned. She understood that survival was about strategy, patience, and awareness. Every glance, every gesture, every word was noted and considered. Trust, she knew, was not given. It was earned, slowly, through consistent respect and understanding. The cowboy continued his work, mindful of her presence. He did not force interaction, did not impose his opinions, but his quiet vigilance was reassuring. He knew that the small gestures mattered. The food, the water, the careful observation. They were not acts of ownership, but of respect, and that respect, while small, was the foundation for the fragile connection growing between them. As the days passed, the Apache woman grew more comfortable with her movements, but her mind remained alert. She remembered every lesson she had learned, every hardship she had endured, and every betrayal she had faced. She was cautious, calculating, and determined. Freedom was not a gift, it was a responsibility. She would defend it, cherish it, and never allow anyone to take it from her again. The cowboy observed her from a distance, noting the small signs of confidence returning to her posture, the sharp intelligence in her eyes, and the quiet strength that radiated from her every movement. He understood that she was not his to protect, nor was she anyone else's. She was her own person, and her freedom was her own to claim. His role was minimal, but significant: to respect, to protect when necessary, and to acknowledge the power of a woman who had endured so much. The desert wind shifted once again, carrying the scent of sage and earth. The ranch was quiet, yet full of subtle life, the distant neigh of a horse, the soft rustle of grass, the sound of footsteps on wooden floors. And in this quiet, the Apache woman began to feel a strange sense of possibility. She could not undo the past, nor could she predict the future, but she could control her actions, her choices, and her spirit. The chains were gone, but her journey was just beginning. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, casting long golden shadows across the ranch. The Apache woman moved through the small room with careful precision, her mind alert and her body ready. She had grown accustomed to the space, to the quiet routine, and to the watchful presence of the cowboy. But today, the air felt heavier, tense in a way that made her heart beat faster. Something was coming. She could feel it. The ranch carried whispers, subtle movements, and silent glances that suggested change, danger, and confrontation. She had learned over the years to trust those instincts. Outside, the landowner rode into view on his horse, a tall man with a stern face and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He carried himself with authority, and the workers on the ranch gave him wide space as he passed. His reputation was well known. He was strict, controlling, and unyielding. For him, rules were not suggestions, they were commands. And anyone who challenged them faced consequences. The Apache woman felt a chill as she watched him from the window, realizing that her freedom, fragile and newly claimed, was being threatened. She had escaped chains, but she had not escaped judgment. The cowboy noticed the landowner too, his posture stiffening as he watched the man approach. He had known this day might come. Standing quietly, he weighed his options. The landowner had ordered strict control of the Apache woman, and any defiance could end badly for both of them. But silence felt wrong. Standing by and allowing injustice to continue had never suited him. He had chosen conscience over convenience once before, cutting her chains at dawn. Today he would have to choose again, whether to stay silent or to act and risk everything he had worked for on the ranch. The landowner dismounted, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust as he walked toward the building where the Apache woman stayed. He entered the room with measured steps, eyes sharp and calculating. "I hear she's moving freely now," he said, voice low but firm. His gaze swept the room, settling on her and then on the cowboy. "Do you understand the rules of this place?" The Apache woman did not flinch. Her posture remained straight, her eyes steady. "I understand," she said simply, her voice calm but unwavering. "I understand that no one can control who I am." The landowner frowned, clearly irritated by her words. He looked at the cowboy, as if expecting him to correct her, to explain, or to enforce his authority. But the cowboy stood quietly, his expression unreadable. He would not speak for her. He could not claim what was not his to claim. Respect meant allowing her to speak for herself, to act on her own terms, and to face the consequences if necessary. Tension filled the room like the heat of the midday sun. The landowner's eyes flickered with suspicion and irritation, and he left the room without another word, his boots echoing across the wooden floor. The Apache woman exhaled slowly, but she did not relax. She knew this was only the beginning. The man would return with stronger measures, and she would have to face him again. Freedom was not granted by chains being removed. It was earned by courage, vigilance, and determination. The cowboy moved closer, quietly placing a small jug of water and some food within her reach. She nodded slightly in acknowledgement but did not speak. Words were unnecessary. Actions spoke louder than promises or commands. For the first time since her captivity, she felt a small measure of trust. Not blind trust, but cautious recognition that someone understood her need for freedom and respect. She would not rely on it, but she would allow it to exist as a possibility. That afternoon, the landowner gathered some of the workers, whispering instructions and warnings. Rumors spread like wildfire through the ranch. The Apache woman's movements were being watched more closely, her actions questioned at every turn. She noticed the subtle changes, the extra pair of eyes at the window, the silent conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Every step she took required awareness, strategy, and patience. She had survived worse than this. She could survive here, but she knew that she had to act carefully, or the freedom she had just claimed could be taken away again. Late in the afternoon, the Apache woman decided to explore the yard beyond her room. She kept to the edges, staying in shadows, observing the land and the people. The desert stretched endlessly, dry and open, yet filled with opportunity. Every movement was calculated, measured, and deliberate. She knew the landowner would notice her absence if she strayed too far. But she also understood the importance of testing her freedom, of feeling the space beyond the room, and of claiming small victories that reminded her she was still alive and in control of her own actions. The cowboy observed her silently, standing a few steps away, careful not to intrude. He had seen her courage before, and he knew she was capable of defending herself. His role was not to lead her, but to ensure that she had the chance to make choices without immediate danger. Each step she took was a test for both of them, and he respected her ability to navigate it. The quiet bond between them grew, built not on dependence, but on mutual recognition of strength and honor. As the sun began to set, the Apache woman returned to her room, her mind racing with thoughts of the past, the present, and the uncertain future. She remembered the night she had spent hiding in forests, learning the ways of survival from her elders, listening to the whispers of the wind, and understanding the signs in the land. Those lessons had guided her for years, and would continue to guide her now. She understood that freedom was fragile and required constant vigilance, but she was ready. She would not bow to fear or threats. That night, the landowner returned with a different air. He carried papers and documents claiming authority and legality. His voice was firm as he demanded her compliance, insisting that she leave the ranch and submit to his control. The Apache woman did not flinch. Her hands were free now, her spirit unbroken. She spoke calmly, clearly, and firmly. "I will not leave on your terms. I will not be claimed by anyone." The landowner's frustration grew. He could not understand her courage, her defiance, and her refusal to obey. He had been used to compliance, to control, and to unquestioned authority. But this woman, strong and unyielding, challenged everything he believed. The cowboy watched from the corner, recognizing the danger but also recognizing her strength. She did not need rescuing, she needed acknowledgement, and she demanded it with every word, every gesture, and every glance. The standoff continued into the night, the desert air heavy with tension. The Apache woman sat near the window, observing the landowner leave again, aware that he would return. She thought of her family, her homeland, and the lessons that had carried her through every hardship. Courage, resilience, and strategy were her allies. She would not allow fear to dictate her choices. She would act with precision, with awareness, and with unwavering determination. In the quiet moments that followed, the cowboy approached her again, placing a small lantern on the floor to provide light. She did not speak, but she acknowledged the gesture with a small nod. It was a recognition of understanding, not dependence. He respected her choices, just as she had made it clear that she was her own person. Their quiet understanding created a fragile but real bond, one built on respect, vigilance, and the recognition of each other's strength. The Apache woman spent the night planning, considering the next steps, and reflecting on the nature of her freedom. She knew that the landowner would not relent easily, and that the desert, though open, could also be full of danger. She thought of the strategies she had used in the past, the ways she had survived when others thought she would fail. Every lesson, every hardship, every challenge had prepared her for this moment. She was ready to act, to claim her life on her terms, and to face whatever came with courage and intelligence. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon again, the Apache woman felt a renewed sense of determination. She understood that freedom was not simply the absence of chains. It was the ability to make choices, to act with awareness, and to face danger without compromise. The landowner represented a challenge, a test of her resolve, and an opportunity to show that courage was stronger than fear. The cowboy, standing silently nearby, understood that he could not lead her or protect her fully. Her strength was her own, and he was only a witness, a careful observer, and a guardian when necessary. The day began with tension, but also with clarity. Every movement, every choice, and every glance carried meaning. The Apache woman moved through the ranch with vigilance, testing boundaries and observing reactions. She knew the landowner would not give up, and that his authority was real, but she also knew that he could not break her spirit. Freedom was her right, her responsibility, and her destiny. By mid-morning, subtle changes began to appear. The workers noticed her strength, the way she moved with confidence and awareness. They whispered among themselves, some with admiration, others with fear. The landowner grew more frustrated as he realized that compliance could not be forced from her. She was unyielding, smart, and aware of the stakes, and in every moment she remained herself, resolute, proud, and free in spirit, even when the world tried to confine her. The cowboy continued his quiet vigilance, respecting her boundaries, watching for danger, and allowing her to act on her terms. He had seen her courage, her intelligence, and her ability to navigate risk, and he understood that the bond between them was not one of ownership or obligation. It was one of respect, awareness, and shared recognition of strength. As the sun dipped low in the sky again, the Apache woman reflected on the day's events. She had faced authority, danger, and challenge, and she had not wavered. Her freedom, though constantly tested, remained intact. She had claimed her space, her choices, and her right to exist on her own terms. And she knew that the journey was far from over. The landowner would return, and the challenges would continue. But she had proven one undeniable truth. Courage, awareness, and resilience could overcome fear, oppression, and expectation. The desert night fell, stars sparkling above like silent witnesses. The Apache woman prepared for rest, her mind sharp and alert, knowing that tomorrow would bring new tests, new opportunities, and new chances to demonstrate the power of freedom and strength. The cowboy, watching from his quiet post, understood the depth of what she had accomplished. This was not a story of rescue or control. It was a story of courage, dignity, and the quiet triumph of spirit over circumstance. The sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the ranch in shades of gold and orange. The Apache woman woke early, her senses alert and her body ready. She had spent weeks in this place, moving carefully, observing every detail, and testing the limits of her freedom. She knew the landowner would not give up easily. His threats were real, and his authority was dangerous. Yet she felt stronger than ever before. Every challenge had prepared her for this moment, the chance to claim her life, her freedom, and her dignity without compromise. The cowboy was already outside, checking the fences and tending the horses. He had learned to move quietly, observing her from a distance, ensuring her safety without imposing on her choices. There was a quiet understanding between them now, born not of obligation but of respect. He had seen her courage, her intelligence, and her resilience. He knew she did not need him to fight her battles, but he could stand as a witness, a silent ally, and someone who would not interfere with her freedom. As the morning progressed, tension grew. Word had reached the landowner that the Apache woman was moving confidently and speaking her mind. His pride and authority were challenged by her defiance, and he rode back to the ranch with a heavy sense of frustration. He dismounted with determination, papers in hand, intending to enforce his authority one final time. He expected compliance, obedience, and submission. What he did not expect was courage. The Apache woman watched him approach, standing tall and calm. Her hands were free, her gaze steady, and her voice clear. "I will not leave," she said simply, "and I will not be claimed by anyone." There was no fear in her tone, only certainty. The landowner's eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. He could not understand a woman who refused to obey, who refused to bow to fear, and who spoke with strength that matched the harshness of the desert around them. The cowboy remained quiet, standing slightly behind her, ready to act if necessary but determined not to interfere. He had learned that freedom was not given. It was taken with courage, intelligence, and resilience. The Apache woman had shown all three in abundance. Today was not about him. It was about her, her choices, and her right to claim her life. The landowner began to speak, citing papers, laws, and orders. He tried to overwhelm her with authority, but she remained calm, listening carefully, responding with short, precise words. She knew that his power was real, but it could not take her spirit. Chains had already been broken, and no document, no threat, could bind her courage. She met his gaze without flinching, showing that she was neither intimidated nor controlled. Hours passed in this quiet standoff. Workers watched from a distance, whispering to one another about the courage of the Apache woman. Some admired her, some feared her, and some wondered if the landowner would ever regain control. The desert around them remained still, almost as if the land itself were observing, waiting for the outcome. And in the midst of this tension, the cowboy understood something important. This was not a battle of force. It was a battle of spirit, and she had already won. Finally, the landowner's frustration reached a peak. He realized that he could not force her to obey, that authority alone was not enough to break her. The papers in his hands were useless against the strength of a woman who had endured loss, hardship, and captivity, yet remained unbroken. He could try threats, punishments, or persuasion, but she had learned a lesson far older and stronger than any law. Courage and self-respect were more powerful than chains. Seeing this, the landowner turned and left, his shoulders heavy with frustration and defeat. The Apache woman watched him go, her body relaxed but her mind alert. She knew freedom was never guaranteed, and vigilance was always necessary. But she also knew that today marked a turning point. Her voice had been heard, her courage recognized, and her right to live on her own terms affirmed. The cowboy approached her quietly, holding a small jug of water and a piece of bread. She accepted it without a word, her eyes acknowledging the gesture. There was no need for gratitude, no need for dependency. They shared a quiet moment of understanding, a recognition of what had been achieved and what it had cost. Freedom was not simple, but it was theirs in this moment, a fragile, hard-earned victory. As the day moved on, the Apache woman began to plan for her next steps. The desert stretched endlessly around the ranch, open and full of possibility. She thought of her family, her homeland, and the life she hoped to reclaim. She knew the journey ahead would not be easy. The landowner might return, the world might still try to limit her, and dangers could appear at any time. But she also knew that she had the strength to face it. Every hardship she had endured had prepared her for this. Every chain she had broken had shown her the power of her spirit. The cowboy continued his quiet work, tending to the ranch and ensuring that nothing threatened her safety. He had learned that his role was not to lead, to command, or to protect her against her will. His role was to observe, to support when necessary, and to respect her choices. And in doing so, he gained a new understanding of courage, freedom, and respect. True bravery was not the act of forcing someone to comply. It was the act of allowing them to claim their life for themselves. As evening approached, the Apache woman stepped outside for the first time in full light. She walked across the open yard, feeling the warmth of the earth beneath her feet and the soft wind on her face. Each step was deliberate, careful, and filled with awareness. She observed the boundaries of the ranch, the movements of the workers, and the distant mountains that called to her memory. Every step she took was a reminder that she was alive, unbroken, and free to choose her path. The landowner did not appear again, and the quiet of the desert evening allowed her a small measure of peace. She found a high spot near the edge of the ranch where she could see the horizon stretching endlessly. The sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of red, orange, and purple. She breathed deeply, feeling the cool desert air fill her lungs. For the first time in what felt like years, she allowed herself to feel the simple joy of freedom, its weight, its responsibility, and its beauty. The cowboy joined her at a distance, silent but present. He did not speak, for words were unnecessary. They watched the sunset together, two figures standing in the vast desert, each changed by the events of the day. The Apache woman did not need him to guide her, and he did not seek to claim her gratitude or trust. They shared a moment of quiet understanding, recognizing the power of courage, resilience, and choice. Night fell over the desert, stars sparkling above like tiny beacons of hope. The Apache woman prepared to sleep, feeling the weight of the day, but also the strength it had given her. She knew that freedom was not simply the absence of chains. It was the ability to make choices, to face danger without fear, and to claim life on one's own terms. She had done so, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and unbroken. In the quiet night she thought of her family and her homeland, of the mountains and rivers that had shaped her life. She knew that she might never return to the exact life she had lost, but she also knew that she had the power to build a new one. Freedom was not given. It was claimed, defended, and cherished. And she had done all three. The cowboy, watching from a short distance, understood the depth of her journey. He had acted once, cutting chains at dawn, but the true victory had been hers alone. She had faced authority, danger, and the weight of the past, and she had emerged victorious. He felt a quiet respect, knowing that he had witnessed something rare, the triumph of spirit over circumstance, courage over fear, and freedom over control. The next morning, the Apache woman made her final preparations. She packed her few belongings, taking care to leave the space as she had found it. Every movement was deliberate, a reflection of the discipline and awareness that had guided her through every hardship. She would not forget the lessons of the ranch, the courage she had discovered within herself, or the quiet support of the cowboy who had recognized without claiming the power of her spirit. As she stepped beyond the ranch gates, the desert stretched before her like a vast open canvas. She walked with steady, confident steps, aware of the dangers that might lie ahead, but unafraid. Each breath, each movement, and each glance affirmed her right to exist freely, to choose her path, and to live without chains. She carried no resentment, no need for vengeance, only the quiet determination to continue her journey with courage and dignity. The cowboy watched her go, understanding that this was not the end, but a beginning. She had claimed her freedom, faced danger, and stood against authority, and in doing so had shown him what true courage and resilience meant. He did not follow her. He did not speak. He simply watched as she disappeared into the horizon, a figure of strength, freedom, and unyielding spirit. The desert wind carried her presence across the land, a quiet reminder that courage, determination, and self-respect could overcome even the harshest chains. And in that moment, the Apache woman knew something profound. Freedom was not just the absence of physical chains. It was the ability to make choices, to face danger without fear, and to walk through life with dignity. She had claimed it, defended it, and would continue to live it on her own terms. The stars shone brightly overhead, and the desert seemed to whisper its approval. She was free, not just from the chains of the ranch, but from the weight of fear, control, and expectation. She had survived, endured, and emerged victorious. And though the world ahead would continue to challenge her, she knew that she had the strength, courage, and resilience to face it all. In the quiet of the desert night, the Apache woman walked on, unbroken, unclaimed, and fully alive. Her journey continued, not bound by chains, not dictated by authority, but guided by her own spirit. And in that endless expanse of desert, she found the ultimate truth. Freedom was hers, and she would never surrender it.